Steve Jobs. You hear that name, and what do you picture? Black turtleneck, round glasses, a game-changing gadget in his hand, right? But what if the man himself was his greatest, most complex creation? Well, that's what we're going to dig into here, this unified theory of his life. The idea that his personality, his passions, and his products were all just one single integrated system.
You gotta pay attention to this quote. Seriously, this is the key to the whole thing. And this wasn't some slip marketing slogan. This was his personal mission statement. For him, there was really no difference between writing code and writing poetry, or between a circuit board and a piece of beautiful calligraphy. If you can understand what he meant by this intersection, you're on your way to understanding the man himself. All right, so this gets us to the big idea. This whole integrated system concept, it wasn't just for his products. It was for his life. His intense drive, his artistic taste, even his demons, all of that was hardwired directly into the DNA of Apple. Think about the iPhone for a second. It's the perfect way to understand Jobs himself. The hardware and the software, they're designed together so that everything just works, right? Well, that's exactly how you have to think about Steve Jobs. His personality was totally inseparable from the products. His obsession with perfection, his need for control, people called it a character flaw. But for Apple, it was the most important feature of all. So if you really want to get how this system works, you've got to look at the source code. We have to go way, way back to the very beginning, to the experiences that basically programmed who he was from a very young age. This wasn't some personality he just developed over time. No, in a way, it was the one he was born into. And it all kicks off with the single most important event of his entire life, his adoption. I mean, this isn't just a footnote in his story. You have to understand, this was the psychological engine that powered everything he did for his entire journey. Just think about that for a second. That one single fact, it created this massive conflict inside him that would literally define the rest of his life. On one hand, he felt left behind, but on the other, he felt like he was destined for something incredible. So this experience created this three-part psychological loop that he lived in. First, you've got the sting of being abandoned, right? That leaves a mark. But then, his adoptive parents told him something amazing. We specifically picked you out, so he felt chosen. And what's the result of that? He came to believe he was special. And that framework is the key. It explains his fierce independence and why he had this absolute, non-negotiable need to control everything around him. And this whole mindset, it found the perfect home in the counterculture of the time. He was obsessed with this thing called the Whole Earth Catalog. You can think of it as the Bible for his generation. It was all about blending tech with this hippie DIY ethos. And its final message, stay hungry, stay foolish, that became his personal mantra. It was like getting permission to go out and create his own rules. Okay, so let's say you have this deep down belief that you're special, that the normal rules just don't apply to you. What happens? Well, you might just develop a kind of superpower. And for Steve Jobs, that superpower had a very cool name. Yep, the reality distortion field. It's probably his most famous and infamous trait. So what the heck was it really? Now, the key thing to get here is that this wasn't just, lying. It was way more powerful than that. It was this intense magnetic force, a combination of charm and pure willpower that could literally bend reality. He'd use it to convince engineers that impossible deadlines were totally possible. He'd even use it on himself to make facts fit the story he wanted to tell. It was his ultimate weapon for shaping the world to his vision. And here's a perfect example of how it worked in practice. This is amazing. See, this wasn't just a weird quirk. It was a power move, a technique. By shooting down your idea and then, poof, bringing it back as his own, he was taking total ownership of it. You can imagine how infuriating that must have been. But it was also a huge part of how he drove everything forward with his own unique, uncompromising vision. Okay, so that's the personality. Now let's connect the dots and see how all of this stuff actually showed up in the products. Because that reality distortion field, he didn't just use it on people, he aimed it straight at technology itself. He had this core belief, this obsession really, that complexity was the enemy, that real genius, real art, was all about making things simple. And that obsession is what drove him to be completely fanatical about having a closed system. So while a company like Microsoft was making software that could run on anyone's hardware, that's an open system, Jobs said, no way. He insisted that Apple had to control everything, the hardware, the software, the whole shebang. Why? because that was the only way he could guarantee that perfect, simple experience from start to finish. It was his personal need for control turned into a business model. I mean, just look at the iBook. Come on! Remember, at the time, laptops were just these boring gray boxes. And then this thing comes out. It was a total statement. It was fun. It was personal. It didn't apologize for being different. This was literally technology meets the liberal arts. And it's exactly what happens when one person's very specific taste and obsessive control gets to call all the shots.
And that control didn't stop with the product. Oh no. It went all the way to the store where you bought it. He couldn't stand the idea of his beautiful, perfect creations being sold by some random person in a giant, messy electronics store. So what did he do? He just reinvented the whole idea of retail. He created these minimalist temples where the product itself was the star of the show. See? It's all just another piece of that integrated system.
And you might think this obsession with design was born in some fancy studio in Cupertino, but you'd be wrong. It actually came from the suburban neighborhood he grew up in. The houses called Eichler homes were all about bringing clean, simple, modern design to regular families. And that idea that great design isn't just for rich people, it should be for everyone, that stuck with him forever.
Okay, so let's recap. We have a kid who felt abandoned but also believed he was totally special. A guy who could bend reality but also demanded brutal honesty. A hippie who built the most buttoned-up, controlling corporation on the planet. It's all a massive contradiction, right? And that's really at the heart of his complicated legacy.
Wow. I mean, you really can't say it any more bluntly than that, can you? This was the world Steve Jobs lived in. It was completely binary. For him, things and people were either insanely great or they were total garbage. There was absolutely no middle ground. So getting feedback from him could be the most inspiring moment of your life, or it could just absolutely crush your soul. And you have to see these paradoxes not as bugs in his system, but as the core features. He was a Zen Buddhist, but he had zero patience. He was this anti-establishment rebel who built the ultimate corporate walled garden. He felt abandoned, but also believed he was so special that the rules were for other people. A minimalist who created these insane objects of desire for the masses. It was all connected. It was all part of the same incredibly complex, integrated person. So at the end of the day, what was all this for? The intensity, the control, the yelling, the perfectionism. What was the point? Well, he tells us right here. He says it himself. It was never really about the money. It wasn't about being famous. It was about this burning desire to build a company where people were fired up to make great stuff, perfect stuff. And maybe that's his real legacy. A company that was designed from the ground up to outlast him, still driven by that same passion. But it leaves you with a big question, doesn't it? Can a singular, all-consuming vision like that ever really be replicated?